We're kicking off our countdown with the strongest hurricane to hit the U.S. since Andrew in 1992. It may have been small in size, but it delivered a knockout blow. At number 10, Charley. And you see, as bad as it is here, look at this. It's about 4 times as bad up to the north. Friday, August 13th, 2004. Hurricane Charley, a Cat 4 mighty might, blasts the southwest Florida coastline with winds up to 150 miles per hour.
The very unusual attribute of Charley was the size of the eye. Little tiny eye. It really made the system more like a tornado than a hurricane, very much like a figure skater bringing the arms in and spinning faster. That's what made the winds so fast, but not over a very large area.
The maximum winds extended out only 7 miles from the center. But if you were in that path, you were in big trouble. Melissa Baldwin was a manager at a hotel right on Charlotte Harbor in Punta Gorda and witnessed Charley's fury firsthand.
There was a lot of screaming because of what it actually, that's one sound that I'll never forget. The actual wind, it was like a train coming through that building. The whole front of the hotel, the awnings fell onto the guest cars and also employees' cars. Power lines were down. There was a lot of windows that were broken.
The experience left Baldwin unable to speak for 2 weeks after the hurricane.
We built our top 10 list on the strength of the storm and the cost of the storm. In modern times, we haven't had many Category 4 storms coming ashore. Because we have that confluence of cost and strength, it just edged into the top 10, just past many great hurricanes of the past.
After landfall, Charley continued to wreak havoc as it traversed the central Florida peninsula, going over Orlando and maintaining hurricane intensity as the center moved off the northeast coast near Daytona Beach. Damage in the U.S. was estimated around $15 billion. Punta Gorda was ground zero for Charley. That's where experienced storm chaser Jim Edds found himself as it was barreling in with nowhere to hide.
I settled on the downwind side of an eye doctor's office, and it was all mayhem. It was like somebody taking the town and sending it through a big grinder and then blowing it right by me. The first real scary moment is a big old piece of sheet metal comes flying overhead and crashes in the building across the street. I'm going like, wow, you don't want to get out in that, because if you went out into that, you were going to get hit by something and you were going to die. It was crazy. I saw a roof blowing down the street. I saw the sign across the street get blown out. I look at that video and I go like, I hope I never get in that position again. It's too scary. I thought I was an experienced hurricane chaser. I had been in 1s, 2s, and 3s, and you get kind of cocky. You go, yeah, I got this wired. But until you've seen something like a strong 4, you don't know what you're getting into. In Charley, I felt like I was not going to make it out of there, but that's how I was going to die, and that was a bad feeling.
Amazing footage, and amazingly, only 10 people were killed in the U.S. by Charley. But that's not the case for our next entry, which was the deadliest to ever hit the Northeast. At number 9, the Great New England Hurricane of 1938.
People really believed hurricanes did not come to New England. And children remember asking their parents if they'd hear of a typhoon or hurricane, and someone would say, don't worry about it, dear. They don't come to New England.
But on September 21st, 1938, a Category 3 roared across Long Island and into New England with catastrophic results.
First of all, people didn't know it was coming. They didn't even put the warning up until after the center had already come ashore by about an hour and a half. Second of all, because it was moving so fast, it maintained much more strength than storms normally do when they get that far in the Northeast.
The 1938 hurricane is one of the benchmark weather events in the history of the Northeast United States because of the speed and ferocity with which it came in and the amount of loss of life and destruction that it caused.
It was responsible for nearly 600 deaths and 1,700 injuries. Almost 9,000 buildings were destroyed, along with over 2,600 boats.
The same country clubs where just weeks before at Labor Day there had been wonderful end-of-summer dances became the places where they took the bodies, and they became the morgues.
Providence, Rhode Island experienced sustained winds of 100 miles per hour with gusts to 125. Across southern New England, there was extensive damage to roofs, trees, and crops. Widespread power outages lasted several weeks in some areas. Downed power lines resulted in disastrous fires in New London and Mystic, Connecticut.
This hurricane not only had strong winds that caused widespread swaths of damage, but it also had storm surge of tremendous magnitude and gigantic waves on top of that.
The center made landfall at the time of astronomical high tide. So you had those waves on top of the storm surge up to 15 feet. Downtown Providence was submerged under a storm tide of almost 20 feet during rush hour.
It was a terrible situation. You had people drowning in the streets. People didn't know where their loved ones were. People at home didn't know if anyone was going to come home. Some can't swim and don't make it. They're never seen again.
The 1938 hurricane is one of the worst case hurricane scenarios that we have on the coastline because it affects such a populated area in such a big way. And all these places are so much more populated and there's so much more wealth today than there was in 1938 that we're talking about one of the top storms in terms of the cost if it were to happen again.
At number 8, Sandy.
A lot of us here at the Weather Channel have just been stunned.
No storms like this in the record book.
This is going to be something that's going to shut down the Northeast.
We are talking about a monster storm.
It's coming in big, and it's coming in strong.
This is really just staggering.
It looks like it's out of a movie.
What we think we're going to see is the worst storm ever in some locations.
Sandy wasn't a very intense hurricane, but it was an extremely large hurricane. In fact, it was the largest hurricane that we've ever measured. It was about a third the size of the United States.
Because it was so big, it was moving a tremendous amount of water toward the coast. That had two effects. One was the water had a tremendous amount of power, so it got pushed up 15 feet high or so against the New Jersey coastline, into New York Harbor, up the Hudson, up the various rivers. The other was it was over 500 miles across that it was pushing water. So that was so much coastline affected that when you added up all the effects, you ended up with the second most expensive storm in U.S. history.
Damage estimates from Sandy amounted to at least $50 billion in the U.S. 650,000 houses were damaged or destroyed, and about 8.5 million lost power. The New York City subway system suffered extensively due to storm surge flooding, and the New York Stock Exchange was subjected to a historic 2-day shutdown.
Two things made Sandy so unique. One, the way it was the ultimate hybrid storm, a hurricane within a gigantic nor'easter, and two, the track that it took, hooking directly back toward the New Jersey coast, which is unprecedented in the known historical record.
Superstorm Sandy made landfall on October 29, 2012 as a post-tropical cyclone with hurricane-force winds. It caused 147 direct deaths, 72 in the U.S., with 41 of those due to the storm surge.
Even though catastrophic hurricanes are relatively infrequent in the Northeast, Sandy demonstrated that, in fact, they can happen. They have in the past, happened with Sandy, could happen again in the future.
During Sandy, the highest water level found in New York was over 8 feet on Staten Island. That's where a couple found themselves face to face with the incredible power of storm surge as they tried to get out of their home.
A wave came through and just broke down the back door, and the house started filling up with water, and we couldn't open the door. So we were trapped in the house, and there was just 2 small windows in the front. And Bill kind of pushed me through one.
Once she had gotten through, I handed her 2 cats. I says, you know, just go, just swim.
And he said, swim as fast as you can. Tell my boys I love them. He was trapped in the house.
And at one point I had said to myself, you know, I'm gonna die here. I gotta figure out a way out. So when I had handed it to the cats and she had gone, I just said that was the only way I can figure I can get out was that opening, and I had just started elbowing the frame, and the frame of the window had popped out. It gave me enough to get through the window.
Bill left the remaining 7 cats as high as he could in the house and headed up the street.
When you got into the street, the water was even higher, and I was about like maybe chin high, and I was trying to keep my head afloat. There was a point when the current was coming so hard that I didn't even see houses. I thought I was being pulled. It felt like I was being pulled back into the ocean.
I couldn't hold myself up, and my cats started clawing on me, and I had to let one of them go. And then started swimming as fast as I can.
Bill was able to swim through debris-littered water to higher ground, all the while not knowing where Kim was.
I saw a house with candle lights, I guess it was, and I just started screaming for help. And I swam through a garage door with one of my cats in my arms, and there was family upstairs, and they had helped me up. My face was cut open, I was bleeding. I didn't know where Bill was. My cat died in my arms, and the police officer drove me to my mother's house a couple of towns away, where I just laid in bed and cried in my mother's arms. A couple of hours later, Bill came through the door, and it was just like I thought I was dreaming. I was just so happy that he made it.
But the beachfront bungalow that Kim had rented for the past 15 years would no longer be considered home.
Maybe about 3 feet of the corner from the front of the house was standing. The rest of the house was just demolished. It was gone.
And none of Kim's cats survived the surge from Sandy.
It cost them their lives by me not leaving that day. And I could never get them back, and it's a regret I'll always have. I miss them terribly. They're my little babies.
An incredible example of just how damaging water can be, and an amazing story of survival. Storm surge of approximately 18 to 20 feet swept over the island, demolishing most of the buildings in the area near today's Isla Mirada. Over 400 people died, most of them World War I Army veterans who were building an overseas bridge. A train was sent there from Miami to rescue them, and the engineer was determined to get there. But the storm got there first.
Even as the water was coming over the tracks, he kept the train coming. He was delayed by a wire on the tracks, but cleared it with the storm already raging. But when he got to Isla Mirada, that was it. The storm surge came in and swept the train and everything but the locomotive into the water. The veterans were on the next key, and they were swallowed by the surge.
The railroad was destroyed and never rebuilt. Within a few years, the overseas highway that the Army vets were working on was completed and links Key West to the mainland today. Just off US 1 in Isla Mirada, a memorial was built to honor the hundreds of veterans and local citizens who died in the hurricane.
A lot of the people who were lost in the Keys during the 35 hurricane were washed away. They actually found some of the bodies in Florida Bay and in the Everglades across at the southern end of the Florida Peninsula. There are some reports, I don't know how true they are, that some people may have been sandblasted to death. The winds were so strong that the sand may have literally abraded the skin off of people.
It's the second deadliest cyclone in the history of the United States. At number 6, the 1928 Okeechobee hurricane. It packed winds up to 145 miles per hour as it slammed into West Palm Beach, decimating the city, which had been founded only 34 years earlier. More than 1,700 homes were destroyed, and in today's dollars, exacted $16 billion in damage.
And then it hit Lake Okeechobee. And Lake Okeechobee was this massive body of water. It's really like an inland sea. So storm surge was created just like it's created in the ocean or in the Gulf, and that overwhelmed the little levee at the south end of the lake.
When the storm passed, you had very, very strong winds pushing water from north to south along the lake, and that flooded the southern part of the lake, Belle Glade area, where they had a poorly constructed dike at the time. And that flooding, 10 feet of water, that's what resulted in the loss of life.
It's really impossible to say how many people actually died, but we know it's probably upwards of 3,000 or more. and about 3/4 of those were migrant farm workers, many of whom were never found, and many others buried in mass graves.
That storm surge just pushed in over top of these people where they were living, pushed their houses into one another, and swept them away into the mud and the farm fields.
It's often called the forgotten storm because so few people are aware of the exorbitant number of deaths and massive destruction. And officials didn't accurately document the devastation for future generations. Also, the majority of those that died were black migrant workers, and in the racial climate of the times, didn't get the same recognition or attention as if they had been white. We are halfway home in our countdown, but the worst is still to come. At number 5, Hurricane Camille. Winds up to 175 miles per hour. Tides nearly 25 feet above normal. A crushing combination for anyone living along the Mississippi coast when Camille made landfall on August 17, 1969.
It's 10 o'clock in Biloxi now, and the eye of the storm is still over 2 hours away. The wind is so strong one can hardly stand up in it. The rain is torrential, streets are flooded, there is no power, everything is black.
Camille is one of the great storms to ever hit the Gulf Coast. It's the only Category 5 storm to hit in the northern Gulf, and it's a very unusual event for that to happen.
It was a very, very strong, very intense hurricane. And one thing we know is that stronger storms can produce a higher storm surge, and Camille produced one of the highest storm surges we've ever seen.
I thought it was the worst thing in the world that I had ever encountered until I met Katrina.
Peak storm surge was up to 24 feet. Only Katrina had a higher surge in the U.S.
I think this was another case that people just couldn't believe if you're in some pretty sturdy building on the other side of the highway from the Gulf of Mexico, that the Gulf could actually come up 20 feet or more and plow all the way inland and take your building away.
A cubic yard of water weighs 1,728 pounds, and when that hits, it's like something that weighs that much hitting you. People think this water's soft. It's not soft, especially when it's coming in rolling like that, and it'll batter anything down. You know, all you got to do is look at what was left of the coast when they got through battering them.
Camille killed over 250 people and caused $1.4 billion in damage, which would translate to about $9 billion today.
It was like 68 square miles of total destruction. 5,556 homes destroyed, a great many more terribly damaged, and the whole Richelieu apartment went down over in Pass Christian. One of the great myths of the storm is that 24 people died in the hurricane party at Richelieu, and that's just not true.
Charles Sullivan is the author of Hurricanes of the Mississippi Gulf Coast, an archivist at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College. He was a National Guardsman during Camille and got trapped with his crew in a barn. Their amphibious vehicle was no match for the overwhelming surge.
Well, we're up in the ceiling and we can't get out because the snout of the thing is above the door. Well, I don't think I've ever known terror like that. I mean, that is absolutely the most terrified that I have ever been, and I think anybody that was in it would say that.
Rescue Blue and White, come home. All rescue units, come home.
There's a whole part of the Camille catastrophe which is not as well known as the landfall on the coast of Mississippi, and that is that days later, its moisture-laden remnants moving across West Virginia and Virginia created these thunderstorms with torrential downpours, moving slowly, dumping huge amounts of rain, and producing a disastrous flash flood there.
Over 150 people died in Virginia from the mountain slides and flooding.
People in Virginia were surprised by Camille. Overnight, the circulation came out of Kentucky and moved to the east. They weren't expecting that. And then the moisture interacted with the mountains. It was like Mother Nature took a huge bucket of water and just dumped it on Nelson County there in the central part of Western Virginia.
And my house was under 12 feet of water. And I've seen about all my family has had destruction of their homes, and I hope I never see nothing like this again.
We continue our countdown with what was the costliest storm on record before Katrina, and it could have been much, much worse. At number 4, the most recent Cat 5 to hit our shores, Hurricane Andrew.
We're live in the Weather Channel Forecast Center. It's August 24th, 1992. History in the making as Hurricane Andrew is now making landfall in South Florida.
Andrew's eye wall was one of the most intense we've ever observed on radar, and it was just like this wind machine, circular saw slicing across South Florida.
But while we had a record surge, the surge damage did not penetrate very far from the coast. If you look at Homestead and Florida City and see all these houses that were reduced to matchsticks and all these shopping centers that were reduced to rubble, that is almost exclusively wind damage.
The compact cyclone, initially rated a Category 4, was later upgraded to a 5 with sustained wind at 165 miles per hour. It shredded the southern suburbs of Miami. About 80% of the city of Homestead was destroyed, including its Air Force Base.
It looked like a nuclear bomb had gone off. The devastation was that complete. Buildings flattened, airplanes tossed over, hangar doors pushed in.
The base wouldn't open again for 2 years. By then, about 40% of the town's population had moved away. Andrew killed 15 people in Florida and caused $26.5 billion in damage. It's estimated that 2,600 homes were destroyed, leaving 175,000 homeless. But it could have been much worse.
If Hurricane Andrew had hit downtown Miami, that would have meant that it hit South Beach, it hit the port, it hit the airport, it hit the Coral Gables business district. The city would likely not be the city it is today if that had happened.
Brian Norcross is our senior hurricane specialist here at the Weather Channel. At the time, he was chief meteorologist at WTVJ in Miami and spent 23 consecutive hours on the air helping the community get through it.
The eye is just coming ashore there in Cutler Ridge. We have no Miami radar, so we can forget the Miami radar. It fell off the building.
About 6 hours before the hurricane made landfall, it was clear to me that this was going to be essentially the worst case that we could face, and that we were going to have to think of what can people do as a final resort, just the maximum amount of protection that they can get inside their home. And so an idea came to me that they should get a mattress off the bed.
Do not think that you are in any way safe if you have not hunkered down and got that mattress over you, friends. This is the time to do it.
The other thing that happened, though, is I thought, wow, we're asking people to take action, and we're sitting here at the anchor desk, and we're kind of worried about our roof as well. So we made plans about an hour before landfall to move off the set into a storage area right off the studio.
We can hear it clearly. I know you folks at home can't hear it, but clearly we can hear it outside. Let me see. I'm all wireless. I'll tell you what, maybe, Raphael, you could find a couple batteries.
We are, Brian. We're all set. We're all set. I'll tell you what, this is the safest spot, without a doubt.
I don't know how many people, hundreds, thousands of people told me after the fact that that's what triggered them to move, because they said, oh my God, if they're leaving where they are, I guess this really is serious. We better take action. And it turned out to be one of the best things I ever did.
Brian's voice of reason during Hurricane Andrew no doubt saved lives, and his expertise continues to save lives today. But there's at number 3, the 1926 Miami Hurricane. In the early 1920s, Miami was the fastest growing city in the U.S. The streets were said to be paved in gold. But the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926 turned the boomtown into a bust.
The 1926 Miami Hurricane is the only example we have of a Category 4 hurricane hitting a developed city. And at the time, they thought that this was a worse disaster than the great earthquake of 1906 that devastated San Francisco. It was a big-time disaster in a major American city.
95% of the buildings in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area were damaged. Winds blew as strong as 140 to 150 miles per hour. A 10-foot storm surge washed across Miami Beach. Water from Biscayne Bay surged over the bayfront, inundating downtown. Major damage stretched along more than 50 miles of the coast.
A lot of people went out in the eye and tried to get to Miami Beach thinking that it was over. And now they're on the causeway. The second half of the storm comes and they get washed off the causeways.
My husband looked up in time to see a huge siren coming at him. Made a V around the post, but it didn't hit him.
When the wind subsided, Miami was devastated. Huge boats were left on city streets. Prestigious oceanfront hotels were turned into sandcastles. Houses and businesses were reduced to rubble. Over 100,000 people lived in the Miami-Fort Lauderdale area in 1926, and about 25% were left homeless.
There's no hurricane in our record book that would be more expensive than the Great Miami Hurricane of 1926 if it were to happen again. There is so much wealth in southeastern Florida that this massive storm affecting two of the most populated counties in the state would put it up in the range of double Hurricane Katrina, something that we've never seen from a single natural disaster.
Over 5 million people currently live in that area impacted by the Great Hurricane of 1926. If the same exact storm happened today, damage could add up to as much as $160 billion or more, far more than any Atlantic hurricane currently on record. Our next hurricane happened over a century ago, but it's still the deadliest natural disaster in American history. At number 2, the 1900 Galveston Hurricane. $1900 was a prosperous time for Galveston. Its position on the Gulf of Mexico made it the center of trade and the wealthiest city in Texas. It was dubbed the Wall Street of the Southwest. This barrier island is 30 miles long and 3 miles wide. Its highest elevation was less than 9 feet above sea level. Yet many of the residents believed that storm surge would not be a problem because of the shallow Gulf waters. Then came early September 1900.
Initially, as the storm moved across Cuba and into this extreme southeastern Gulf of Mexico, all the indications were that the storm was going to move north, which would take it into Florida and ultimately up the East Coast.
But it continued moving westward and turned into a Category 4 hurricane, packing winds over 130 miles per hour. With only ship reports and elementary meteorological equipment, the city of Galveston remained largely unaware of this monster bearing down on them.
I don't think we can comprehend the degree of normalcy that prevailed right up to probably almost noontime of the day the storm hit.
Late that afternoon, the island was engulfed by 15 feet of water. 3,500 homes were destroyed.
The waters of the bay had met the waters of the Gulf, and Galveston was no longer an island. It was simply a part of the ocean floor. And this wall of debris was filled with pieces of houses, furniture, pianos, pots, pans, cats, dogs, and people.
It was just this mega, horrible debris field that smelled for months after the storm as more and more bodies were found. It was just hellacious.
There were 37,000 people living in Galveston at the time. Up to 12,000, or almost a third of its population, was killed, making it the deadliest natural disaster in our history.
The 1900 Galveston hurricane was really the hurricane of record for this country. If you put a large population in an area that's prone for storm surge flooding, it's a recipe for disaster.
Amazingly, they got determined to stay there and rebuild the city. So they did two incredible things. The first thing they did was built this big seawall to protect themselves from most hurricanes that come along. The second thing is that they raised the city behind the seawall. They took the buildings that survived, they jacked them up, they put dirt under that, and they created an entirely new city that is much more hurricane resistant.
That seawall took a beating during Hurricane Ike in 2008, but it held up and helped minimize damage in Galveston. Florida leads the way with 5 on our list. Charley, the 1935 Labor Day hurricane, 1928 Okeechobee, Andrew, and the 1926 Miami disaster. Even 2 hurricanes from the Northeast made our countdown. The 1938 Great New England Hurricane and Superstorm Sandy. And no doubt you can probably guess what's next. A catastrophe so great, it sent shockwaves around the world and brought our nation to its knees. The #1 worst hurricane is
Katrina.
Katrina.
Katrina. It's going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
At times, it's hard to see more than maybe a few yards because there's so much water in the air.
We are dealing with the eye wall of Hurricane Katrina. Palm limbs like that down on power lines. Everyone knows the story of Katrina in the U.S. The costliest, $108 billion. Katrina. The 3rd deadliest, over 1,800.
Katrina.
And the highest storm surge, as high as 28 feet in coastal Mississippi.
The storm surge that Hurricane Katrina produced was about a 1 in 400 year storm surge event, but that doesn't mean that we couldn't see that again in our lifetime.
That's one of our photographer's vans out there. You can see that is now seeing water halfway up to the windows.
A couple of days before the storm hit, I said, this is the catastrophe of our time.
Katrina taught us that there can still be death tolls of more than 1,000 people in the United States, even with today's modern technology.
New Orleans had a flood, we had a hurricane. I do think New Orleans captured a whole lot more attention than the Gulf Coast did, simply because it's a great city. Although built in the worst place you could build one, what it is a great city in a mud hole. It should never have been there.
Katrina taught us that the worst can happen, right? You can talk about these dire situations and this confluence of events that it takes for New Orleans to go underwater, or for really bad things to happen in New York City or in Miami or in Tampa. And sometimes they do.
We all saw the horrifying images from Katrina, but unless you witnessed it firsthand, you probably can't imagine what people went through. Now, years later, we visited with 2 of the iconic figures of the Gulf Coast. President of Plaquemines Parish in Louisiana, Billy Nungesser, and Bobby Mahoney, owner of the famous Mary Mahoney's restaurant, which has been serving locals and celebrities for over 50 years in Biloxi, Mississippi.
Katrina's something you didn't want to be in the way of, you know. Somebody asked me, why did I stay here for Katrina? I said we thought Camille was the mother of all storms, till we found out storms don't have mothers.
Katrina was New Orleans' worst nightmare. It was a storm that flooded the city and surrounding parishes, and we weren't prepared for it. I was a private citizen then. I rode out the storm 14 miles from the eye on a mound of mud that I built by digging a lake right next to the Mississippi River. I rescued 30 people, so we were pretty much on our own down in South Plaquemines for many weeks. I decided to run for office because of the lack of response by public officials in my area.
Biloxi was like a war zone, right? Especially right here by the water. You know, anything the water got to, it was just a sight to see.
When the storm had passed and I walked outside on that mound of mud, I fell to my knees. All I saw was water.
For hurricanes coming, you know, especially if you're around water, you know, you need to get away from it, because Mother Nature don't have any gold standards it can't overcome.
We know we're going to see another Katrina one day. And as we prepare and minimize those chances, we need to continue to educate the public on the risk, because as the flood protection gets better, people are less likely to leave, and that's a mistake to stay.
After the storm, emotionally, you know, Biloxi was down probably for about 2 to 3 months, and then after that we just got it together and just started trying to rebuild as quick as we could. And thank God the federal government was there to come help us, because they came in big time.
The emotions and just the threat of hurricane season and the memories from Katrina gives you a little unsettled feeling in your stomach. And I sleep a little lighter during hurricane season. Katrina will forever be in everybody's mind from the New Orleans area as the worst storm ever. Hopefully, when we see that next storm, we'll be better prepared and we'll see less damage and less loss of life. But it's something that'll take many more years before we forget what Katrina brought to New Orleans.
That's it for our countdown of the top 10 worst hurricanes. You know, over half the American population now lives within 50 miles from the coast. And recent disasters like Katrina and Sandy prove that we could be just one hurricane away from adding another one to our list. I'm meteorologist Jim Cantore. Thanks for watching.